sure we fund this teacher proposal, as well as provide enough to keep the slots. Head Start's only covering about 650,000 kids now. Used to be much higher than that. And I'm very worried that we don't keep up and will continue to lose slots in that very critical program in communities like the one I'm from.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from New York. And now yield to my friend from Virginia, Mr. Bob Good, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Young, for being back with us. You know, it's astonishing that the President's most recent projected proposed budget actually increases over last year's record largest proposed budget ever. This new budget proposes some $4 trillion more in spending, some $5 trillion more in taxes on the American people. Now, last time you were with us, you had a little trouble with this question. I assume that you won't have trouble today. The national debt is how much now?
As you know, the national debt is about $34 trillion.
How quickly are we acquiring another trillion now?
I don't believe we take on debt by average a day, but
okay, so it's increasing by $1 trillion every so,
well,
how often?
Interest rates, as you know,
No,
are not $1 trillion.
They're going up. The debt is going up by $1 trillion approximately how many days or weeks or months, what would you say?
Well,
you aware of that?
Let me point out one of the cost drivers of
that's not,
adding to the debt.
Reclaiming my time. I don't want to know about
$1 trillion.
Reclaiming my time. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Do you know how quickly the debt is going up by $1 trillion?
I think we just...
I just think that would be an important thing to know as the budget director. It's going up about every 100 days or so, another trillion is being added to the debt. What will the debt per taxpayer be by the end of the President's projected 10-year budget? How much would an average citizen owe? Or how much per citizen would we owe in debt with the President's projection?
Well, Mr. Good, you know we don't tax citizens for debt payment.
I didn't ask you about tax and citizens. So the President's projected budget is going to go from $35 trillion roughly to how much the debt is going to go by his projection. Now, this is without extra supplemental emergency or extra spending. By his projection in his proposed budget, how much is he proposing to take the national debt to over 10 years? From the 35 trillion to how much in 10 years?
Well, first, Mr. Good, you know debt is cumulative.
I'm asking for a number. He put it in his budget.
Mr. Chairman, can we?
He put it in his budget. He put it.
Parliamentary inquiry, is the
will the
witness
gentleman
allowed to
yield?
answer the question without constantly being
The clock
interrupted?
is still running.
We're going to give you the
2:45.
time. We will give you more time. He's asking a question. Director Young, answer his question to the best of your ability. If you don't know, say I don't know, and then we'll keep going. So what's the question?
Let me re-ask my question. At the end of the President's, it's in writing, proposed budget, our national debt in 10 years will be how much? I just want $1. I don't want an explanation, just $1.
If you look on S1 in the budget.
Hey, let me stop you again.
Yep.
The only thing I want to hear is a dollar amount
Well,
in
you're
10
going to hear
years.
my answer.
Okay.
Which is
Then
S1
I'm going
in
to stop
the
you and
budget.
reclaim my time. This is my time. It's $52 trillion. $52 trillion is what his proposed budget. I didn't make it up. It's his budget. It's in
the
writing
budget, and I'm
that it
telling
would go
people
from
where to look
34
for
trillion to 52 trillion in 10 years. Now, what does that amount equate to per citizen? If we take the 300, it's estimated, the Census Bureau says we'll have 350 million Americans in 10 years, 350 million. So if you take the 52 trillion, divide by 350 million Americans, about how much per citizen is that?
Mr. Good, that is a false
It's a math
narrative.
question.
It is a false narrative.
No, the question is, if we take reclaiming my time, thank you, I didn't ask, reclaiming my time, if we take $52 trillion, we divide it by 350 million Americans, that comes out to how much? How much do we each owe? What is our
I'm
share?
not playing into this narrative as if we
Okay, let me
bill
answer the
everyone,
question for you.
debt payment.
It's $150,000 per citizen is what the President is projecting without any emergency, supplemental, extra spending to take our national debt. That's what he's projecting to do, which equates to about $400,000 per household by his projection. Now, we have never had this level of debt in history. We have never had this level of debt to GDP since World War II, and I'm sure you're aware of that. How would the President propose we would respond to a major crisis, say World War III, or some other, the next virus situation or whatever, with this level of debt coming into it? How
Mr.
would we
Good, are we
respond
not
to
in a
that?
crisis situation now with what's going on in Ukraine?
We are-
What's going on in the Middle
Is-
East?
Isn't it
This president
interesting?
has put
Isn't it
forth a
interesting?
plan
and
to
rec-
respond to
reclaiming my
both
time.
of
Thank you.
those,
Reclaiming my time. Thank you.
and the border
Reclaiming my
without
time,
this
Mr.
House
Chairman. I'm
acting.
reclaiming my time.
The gentleman reclaims his
I don't have a
time.
question there. Now, it's interesting on the priorities of this administration that the first thing you proclaim as the crisis is what's going on in Ukraine. I would submit that the president has created a debt crisis, unprecedented in our history, and he proposes to make it worse over the next 10 years because he wants to increase the debt by $18 trillion by his own budget. He has created a border crisis, which is further exacerbated by this budget, by the way, which does nothing to address the border crisis that he has created. But yet, when you speak of crisis, you bring up Ukraine because the president wants to borrow or print, some $60 billion and send it overseas to Ukraine. I think it's great that you are illustrating for the American people what this president's priorities are, both illustrated by his budget today and your inability to answer basic questions about the budget today and the impact upon the American people by the debt that he is willfully creating, and you go right to Ukraine.
The gentleman
I look
has
forward to
30
your
more
support
seconds.
with the border supplemental, Mr. Good.
The gentleman's going to get 30 more seconds, and I'm going to give the gentlelady, Director Young, time to respond, but you get 30 more seconds.
Well, so does the president have an understanding what the impact is of his spending, his deficits, his growing debt on Biden-inflation under which the American people are suffering? Does he understand the impact, again, of his spending, his borrowing, his printing, his debt that's causing the Biden-inflation under which American people are suffering? Does he understand that?
And
With
Mr.
that, the gentleman's time has expired, but
Mr.
you will have as
Thank
much
you,
time
sir.
as you want to answer.
Mr. Chairman, I get why people don't want to give the president credit for 15 million jobs added, for unemployment being at a 50-year historic low, under 4% for 2 years. I get that. I get the grandstanding. But if you want to do something about the border, which I've heard a lot about, there was a bill right in front of Congress to provide resources and authorities, more than anybody could ever dreamed of in any
amnesty bill?
bipartisan scenario. But we choose to come in rooms like this to talk about the budget and blast the president who tried to do something about it. And
You
was
are the
stopped.
budget director. You ought to be able to
I got
answer
it.
budget
Listen,
questions.
Listen, I've got the mic. The border has a cost. It's fair to bring it up. It's a significant cost, but the time's expired, and now Ms. Ballin has the floor for 5 minutes to talk about whatever she'd like to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Young, for being here. And, we do truly appreciate both your professionalism and your expertise. You're not new to the Hill. And we appreciate the time that you've given us today. I have a question. We just heard this back and forth about the debt. It was kind of hard to tease out the parts because there was quite a bit of talking over your answers. My understanding is that President Trump added $8.4 trillion to the debt. And I'm wondering if I have that correct.
You do, and the point I was trying to make is debt is cumulative
Yep.
over administrations.
And do you know, was that the largest increase in the debt in modern history?
In modern history, yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that direct answer. One of the things that I talk about a lot in this committee is housing, and not just because it's greatly impacting Vermonters. We have the second highest rate per capita of homelessness in the nation, which is surprising to people because we are a rural state. But I also like to bring it up in this committee because it is something that cuts across party line. It doesn't matter what congressional district you're representing, you're probably experiencing a housing crisis. And it is a growing crisis in rural America. And so across the country, we have seen skyrocketing rates. We've seen predatory landlords, hedge funds buying up 500,000 homes. I know for me, I think about housing as the basis of stability for families. And so it enables children to thrive. It enables people to get better healthcare outcomes. And I know that we can end homelessness through more humane, cost-effective solutions that ensure that everyone has access not just to permanent housing, but also with supportive services. And I'm wondering if you could this morning tell us, how does the president's budget advance those goals of ending homelessness through more permanent supportive housing so people stay housed?
So when we talk about lowering costs, which I think I've heard agreement that we need solutions.
Yeah.
The president's put forward many proposals on housing, and I'd like to talk about a few. One, new first-time home buyer and home seller tax credit of $10,000 over 2 years. That would improve affordability for middle-class first-time home buyers. It also unlocks starter home inventory for first-time home buyers and helps middle-class families who are locked in because of rates. Now, we know rates are going to come down over 2 years. This would be a 2-year bridge, so those middle-class families could move into larger homes if they need to for their families. It would also unlock starter homes. This budget also provides $10 billion in funding for new first-generation down payment assistance program. We believe that is critical. We know most Americans hold wealth through home ownership. My family, being one of them, is a way into the middle class to own a home. And also to address the critical shortage of affordable housing communities. The budget provides $20 billion in funding for a new innovation fund for housing experience, which would be a competitive grant program for communities that want to expand housing supply. So this is critical. Part of lowering costs, what families will tell you they're hurting over is housing costs.
Yes.
We need more housing supply and more affordable housing. These proposals taken together would do that.
And I think people really discount the impact that a program like down payment assistance can really have on helping people build up equity. I know that was true when I was in my state legislature. I remember being in a committee meeting with some members of my committee saying, well, does this really make a difference to offer a down payment assistance program? It was so successful in Vermont, we reauthorized it numerous times because the take-up rate was incredible. It gives people an opportunity to get into homes and build up that equity. I'm wondering, too, if you could just touch a little bit on the housing supply issue. There's a critical need right now. How does the president's budget address the shortage in supply overall? Because it is locking up basically at every level of the housing market.
Yeah, the $20 billion I spoke about, which would be competitive, if communities wanted to apply for those grants and take on the zoning challenges and the many other local challenges that there are to affordable housing, this would allow communities to take their own local approach. Each has their own issues as to why they can't build enough housing, and that is why we would have a competitive program so people could send in proposals that work for them. And work with our housing agencies to develop things that fit for your communities.
Well, I really appreciate it. I know I'm over time. I just want to say how important it is for me to know that the president and the administration understands how housing impacts the entire economy. And this is a way for us to have solid footing for individuals, for families, for communities. And I just really appreciate the attention to this issue. Thank you, Director Young. I appreciate it.
Ms. Ballant, I lost control of the clock a long time ago, so we're just, but that's okay. We need to make our points. They're important. And my friend, the general, highest ranking officer here in the House, and classmate from Michigan, Jack Bergman, take it over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a Marine, I'm used to sometimes high-intensity situations. This is not one of them. But as I've listened here, reminds me of a time about 40 years ago when I was probably 5 years into the private sector medical market, and I had the opportunity to work for a wonderful leader and boss who believed that all of life could be boiled down to analogies of two types: sports and family living. So let's talk about, family living. 10 years after he made that statement to me, so 30 years ago, I had a chance to realize when, while going through a tough part of our family life, I realized that I know when no communication is going on, because I was sitting with my then soon-to-be ex-wife, figuring out how to end a long-term marriage, that kids were involved. And I would suggest to you that the kids, when we think about what we've talked about here, I've been trying to put myself in the mind of my daughters at the time who were 16, what they would think of the conversation here. How would it apply to them? And I think there is probably not a person in this room that doesn't say that what we are trying to do here is for the betterment of our kids or our grandkids. So I would suggest to you, until in this case, we figure out a way to repair the relationship between the parents, which in this case is the executive branch and the legislative branch, and all that are within each, we are still going to go farther down the abyss to where we can't climb out. So I would just suggest to all my colleagues that we stop with the rhetoric that doesn't add value to what we're leaving for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids and whatever future generations. So I think we can all do better. First term, when the chairman mentioned that some of us who were freshmen 8 years ago were on budget committee, there was a data point put in front of us. You can tax the wealthy 100%. It still doesn't come anywhere near to what we need to begin grabbing fiscal control of our country for the betterment of our people. So I would suggest we could probably stop with that. So let's get now, you know, I have sucked up 3 minutes of oxygen here of my time, but, you know, this cycle, we as the Budget Committee created task forces. I have the honor of leading the task force on improper payments, so I'd like to focus on that just for the remainder of my time. And so let me read something here. Despite improper payments totaling more than $236 billion in FY 2023, which is up from $150 billion in 2017 alone, the president's budget does not propose a government-wide effort to begin to solve the issue. I'm not saying we're going to completely solve it, but begin to take a deep look. So, what specific actions is OMB taking to improve the accuracy and the efficiency of payment systems to reduce the rate of improper payments?
Thank you for your remarks, Congressman. I believe you when you tell me what our children would be left with, and we have an opinion on that as well. And a respectful dialogue is happy to fix these very complex problems in the country. As you know, the UI program is one of the largest drivers to improper payments. The thing that makes that difficult, these are state-run, so you've seen one UI program.
Let's look at the federal level. Let's not
Yeah,
talk about, but
so
let's talk about at the federal level. We got, admittedly, some things are at the state level. Let's talk about what we can look at right here in our own backyard.
So in our budget, we have significant new proposals. Our second year asking for them. We're seeing actually some traction in committees of jurisdiction to move on legislation. We have a proposal that would save about $2 billion by modernizing and protecting and strengthening the UI program. So I'm saying it is not, there is a federal responsibility. The difficulty is that each state runs a different one. But we have a proposal to improve that system, which would save about $2 billion.
I know my time is past, and I don't want to abuse the time, but unless we look at, in one example, the fraud related to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is federal, we're missing an opportunity and we're getting farther behind. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Michigan and Director Young. We passed the first bipartisan process reform, budget process reform legislation in a decade out of this committee, and then this week on the floor. And Ms. Ilhan Omar, my colleague, served as the ranking member. And I got to say,
I heard
better
this.
watch your back, man. She was good. It was efficient, and I appreciate her leadership and support.
I fully support her promotion. I think it'd be unanimous.
That's only because you've sat here for so long next to me. Ms. Omar, you have 5 minutes for the gentlelady from Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman. And I don't want to get in trouble, so I'll stay as the vice ranking. Director, it's really good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk a little bit about addressing the opioid crisis that we're seeing throughout the country, especially in my district. According to the CDC, the national overdose rate topped over 100,000 deaths again in 2023. Federal spending on the crisis has surged, with roughly 40% more dollars flowing to our states. States like Minnesota have recently been allocated hundreds of millions of dollars for opioid overdose prevention as well. While all of this funding has helped, there's still much more to be done. That's why it was very encouraging to see the president's budget request continuing to prioritize vital investment in SAMHSA. These programs promote mental health, prevent substance misuse, and provide treatment and recovery support. Director Young, can you outline the new funding priorities in this proposal that could better support our states and community organizations in the front lines of this epidemic?
I don't think there's anyone here who would disagree that we have to use every tool at our disposal to do something about the opioid epidemic in this country. This president has put forth robust budgets, even in a flat budget under the Fiscal Responsibility Act. This president is showing that it is his priority to do something about this epidemic, Congresswoman. $44.5 billion for the National Drug Control Program agencies, an almost $900 million increase over continuing resolution level funding. This budget prioritizes expanding evidence-based harm reduction, expanding access to treatment for substance abuse use disorder, overdose prevention, combating narcotics trafficking networks, countering illicit fentanyl at the border, and disrupting the international synthetic drug trade. I know we got into a little back and forth about the border bill. I think one place that has always had bipartisan support was in the president's border supplemental request, which to put more of the equipment, the NII equipment at the land ports of entry to catch fentanyl from coming into our southern border. And I hope we can find a way to work in a bipartisan way to do something about this.
Thank you so much. I hope so. I hope so too. I want to talk a little bit about the housing shortage as well that many of our communities are experiencing. I'm glad that this budget proposal keeps pushing for pro-housing policies, especially at a time when the dream of home ownership seems increasingly unreachable. To address our housing shortage, we must build more affordable housing and more different types of housing. This idea is the core of my Homes for All Act, investing billions of dollars in development of permanent, affordable public and private housing units with a focus on mitigating residential displacement and segregation. Congress can and must lead here, since it has done before by delivering funds to our public housing authorities. The federal government once directly helped build so much housing. We renovated and repaired homes and provided subsidies to increase home ownership on a massive scale. It is time to repeal the Faircloth Amendment and get back to directly assisting our localities with developing and guaranteeing stable housing for all. Director Young, can you describe both the ongoing and proposed actions that the administration is prioritizing to improve affordable housing stock?
Again, inflation is moderated 2/3, but families are still struggling. And one place is in housing, a lack of affordable housing. That's why this president, when we say lowering costs is a theme of this budget, housing is centered to that. Helping first-time homeowners, helping middle-class families with tax credits who might be locked in with low interest rates, who need a bigger house for, a surprise third child. They need to move up to a bigger house. And we need first-time homeowners to have access to more housing stock. This budget would do something about that to allow a 2-year tax credit. Also, $20 billion in funding to have localities, municipalities apply And if they have a zone problem, use the funding to do something about that. Build affordable housing. We know every solution is different depending on where you live. And we look forward to working with those who want to take on those pieces of legislation.
Wonderful. I know a little bit about that surprise third child. So I felt like that was directed at me.
It wasn't actually.
But I appreciate the concern and care that is given to increasing more affordable housing, both in ownership and just in stock. Thank you so much.
I think that